The dawn was just beginning to blush the Florida sky when Carol and Michael Harrington loaded their dark green Jeep Cherokee with camping equipment and camera gear. It was June 14th, 1995, and after months of planning, the couple was finally embarking on their long-awaited adventure into the Everglades. Michael, a 32-year-old amateur biologist, had convinced his wife Carol, a 29-year-old literature professor, that this trip would provide the perfect material for the book on American ecosystems they dreamed of writing together. "Are you sure we packed enough insect repellent?" Carol asked, closing the door to their Tampa apartment. "The mosquitoes in the Everglades are legendary." Michael smiled, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "We have enough to repel every insect in Florida," he replied, kissing her forehead. "Besides, I booked a guide for the first day. He'll show us the safe routes and the best spots for wildlife viewing." The 3-hour drive passed in a blur of enthusiastic conversation, their plans laid out for the 5 days they would spend exploring one of North America's most unique ecosystems. At 9:37 a.m., a detail later noted in the official park log, the Harringtons arrived at the Flamingo Visitor Center, where they were scheduled to meet their guide. "I'm so sorry, but Ray fell ill last night," Lisa Conroy, the park's guide coordinator, informed them. She was a middle-aged woman with skin weathered by the sun. "We can reschedule for tomorrow, or I can recommend some self-guided trails that are perfectly safe for beginners." Michael exchanged a look with Carol. "What do you think, honey? Should we venture out on our own?" "We've been researching for months," she replied, though a flicker of hesitation touched her voice. "I suppose we can handle one of the marked trails." Lisa provided them with a detailed map, marking the areas permitted for unguided visitors and underlining restricted zones in red ink. "Stay on these paths," she warned. "Don't wander into the deep marshlands and be back before sunset. The Everglades becomes a different world after dark." The Harringtons signed the visitor log, noting their planned route, the Anhinga Trail, then a stretch of the Gumbo Limbo Trail to the Lake Palmetto Lookout. They were expected to check out by 5 p.m. At 11:15 a.m., a family of tourists from Ohio inadvertently photographed the couple near the start of the Anhinga Trail. It would be the last confirmed image of Carol and Michael Harrington. By 7:30 p.m., with the sky now dark and the Harringtons neither return nor answering their cell phone, Lisa Conroy notified the park authorities. Park Ranger Jackson Reed, a 15-year veteran of the Everglades, organized a preliminary search team. They swept the main trails with flashlights and communication equipment. "We found nothing unusual," Reed would later report. "No signs of a struggle, no abandoned gear. It was as if they had vanished into thin air." The formal search began at dawn. 3 ground teams, 2 light aircraft, and an aquatic search unit with trained dogs methodically combed the surrounding areas. The Harringtons' Jeep remained in the parking lot, their day packs missing, but the rest of their luggage untouched in the back. On the 3rd day, authorities expanded the search perimeter to include areas normally off-limits to tourists. Monroe County Sheriff Frank Dempsey faced the local media, who had begun to cover the disappearance. "We are exploring all possibilities," he declared, his face grim, "from an accident in the swamp to other situations." What Dempsey didn't mention publicly was that investigators had found something disturbing. The Harringtons' footprints, identifiable by the distinct tread of their hiking boots, veered abruptly off the marked trail about 2.5 kilometers in. The tracks continued for another 500 meters, heading toward a restricted area known locally as the Labyrinth, a dense maze of mangroves and serpentine channels where even experienced rangers moved with extreme caution. More unsettling still, alongside the couple's tracks, investigators identified a 3rd set of prints. They belonged to a man wearing old military boots, a model that hadn't been manufactured in decades. As the first week of the search concluded without results, hope began to fade. Carol's and Michael's parents arrived from Illinois and Massachusetts, their faces etched with anguish as they pleaded on camera for any information about their children. On June 23rd, a local wildlife photographer named Marcus Whitaker voluntarily walked into the sheriff's office. His testimony would change the course of the investigation. "I saw them," he stated with certainty. "I was photographing herons near the old abandoned lookout, the one they closed after the '92 floods. The couple was talking to an older man, thin, wearing faded military clothes. I figured he was one of those veterans who live off-grid in the swamps. They didn't seem to be in any danger. In fact, they were laughing, pointing at something on a map the old man was showing them." What had happened to the Harringtons after that encounter? And who was the mysterious old man of the Everglades? A partial answer would arrive exactly 4 weeks after their disappearance, when Ranger Jackson Reed, on a routine patrol, found something that would chill the blood of everyone involved in the case. On July 12, 1995, Jackson Reed was navigating his official boat through the narrow channels of northern Blackwater Lake. It was a suffocating day, even by Florida summer standards. The heavy air seemed to cling to the skin, and the constant drone of insects created an unsettling backdrop. After 28 days of fruitless searching, the official operation to find the Harringtons had been significantly scaled back. All that remained were sporadic patrols and the ever-diminishing hope that some clue might emerge from the swamp's depths. Reed, a 42-year-old man with skin like tanned leather, knew the Everglades better than most as his boat glided silently between the cypress trees rising from the dark water. An unusual glint caught his eye near the northern shore where a small muddy peninsula formed. He steered the boat closer. As he approached, the ranger felt a cold dread creep up his spine. Carefully arranged on a flat rock, as if on a macabre altar, was a bundle of perfectly folded clothes: a light blue cotton shirt, a pair of khaki cargo pants, a white linen blouse, a beige hiking skirt, 2 pairs of socks and underwear. Everything was neatly organized, with no signs of a struggle or even a tear. "Central, this is Reed," he transmitted, his voice tense over the radio. "I've found what appears to be the Harringtons' clothing. I need a forensics team at the north side of Blackwater Lake. Coordinates G7 on the park map." While waiting for backup, Reed meticulously documented the scene with his camera, careful not to disturb anything. It was then that he noticed something that sent a shiver down his spine. Less than 10 meters from the makeshift altar, the dark waters of the lake churned with activity. Several American crocodiles, some over 4 meters long, patrolled the area lazily. Blackwater Lake was known among the rangers as having one of the highest concentrations of these ancient predators in the entire park. 2 hours later, Sheriff Dempsey personally supervised the operation as the forensic team processed each garment. "No visible blood," reported Dr. Elena Suarez, the county's chief forensic scientist. "The clothes are clean, as if they were just washed. And look at this," she said, pointing to the pants pockets, which had been carefully emptied and turned inside out. "What the hell does this mean?" Dempsey muttered, running a hand through his graying hair. "Who takes off their clothes, folds them neatly, and leaves them next to a crocodile-infested lake?" "Someone who wants us to think they were eaten," Reed replied, voicing the fear they all shared. "This was no accident. Someone wants us to believe the Harringtons went into the water and were attacked." The discovery transformed the investigation. What had begun as a search for missing persons was now officially a criminal case. The FBI joined the effort, sending Special Agent Diana Ramirez, a criminal profiler from the Miami office. "We are dealing with someone meticulous and organized," Ramirez explained during the first joint briefing. "The arrangement of the clothes is not random. It's a message, possibly a trophy or a signature. The FBI labs analyzed every fiber. The results confirmed the clothes belonged to Carol and Michael Harrington. There were no traces of blood, but they did find microparticles of an industrial-grade detergent, rarely used by consumers. Whoever did this washed the clothes before placing them here, Ramirez concluded. We're dealing with someone who understands basic forensic procedures and takes precautions. Meanwhile, rescue divers scoured the bottom of Blackwater Lake for days. They found no human remains, but they did recover an object that baffled investigators. A Swiss Army knife that Michael's parents confirmed he always carried. It had been deliberately stabbed into a submerged log about 3 meters deep. 5 days later, Marcus Whitaker, the photographer, was found dead in his mobile home on the outskirts of Homestead. The official cause was an accidental overdose of painkillers and alcohol. But Sheriff Dempsey noticed something disturbing. Next to Whitaker's body was a map of the Everglades with a red circle drawn precisely around the area of Blackwater Lake where the clothes were found. This is no coincidence, Dempsey insisted to Agent Ramirez. Whitaker might have seen more than he told us. The FBI's background check on Whitaker revealed he had briefly served in the Army in the early 80s, but was discharged for unspecified psychological issues. His neighbors described him as a loner, obsessed with the Everglades, where he would spend weeks at a time camping and taking photographs. On July 26th, while examining Whitaker's camera equipment, investigators made a chilling discovery. On a memory card, they found a sequence of photos taken the day the Harringtons disappeared. The images showed the couple following an older man into a dense mangrove thicket. The old man's face was never clearly visible, always partially obscured by foliage or turned at an angle. The final photograph in the sequence showed something that froze the investigators' blood. Michael Harrington was on his knees, his hands apparently tied behind his back, while Carol stood beside him, her face a mask of terror. And behind them, barely visible in the shadows of the trees, was the silhouette of the old man holding what appeared to be a long gun. Whitaker didn't die by accident, Dempsey declared, slamming his fist on the table. He was silenced, and these photos are proof we're hunting a killer. Agent Ramirez studied the images, her expression grim. A predator who knows the Everglades like the back of his hand, who knows how to move without being seen, and who understands the local wildlife well enough to try to mask his crimes as crocodile attacks. As the team drew up new strategies, one question lingered. If the Harringtons had been murdered, where were their bodies? And more importantly, who was the mysterious old man of the Everglades? The answer would remain buried in the swamps for 5 long years. On September 22, 2000, the dawn over the Everglades brought a thick fog that crept lazily across the dark waters. Roger Patel and his 17-year-old son, Amir, were out early for a day of fishing. They knew these channels well. Roger had been fishing these waters for nearly 3 decades. "Dad, I think we're getting too close to the restricted zone," Amir commented as they navigated a narrow channel flanked by Spanish moss-draped cypress trees. Roger adjusted the outboard motor, slowing their speed. "I know these swamps better than the Rangers, son. This is where the big bass hide." The boat glided silently into a small clearing where the channel widened into a lagoon. Roger cut the engine, letting the boat drift to a stop. The ensuing silence was almost tangible, broken only by the occasional splash of an unseen creature and the constant hum of insects. "Get the rods ready," Roger instructed. "We'll use dark lures today. They won't see anything bright in this fog." Amir leaned down to retrieve the tackle box when he noticed something unusual in the shallow water near the bank. "Dad, there's something over there," he pointed. "Looks like metal." Roger squinted, trying to pierce the morning haze. "Probably just trash from some careless tourist." but teenage curiosity got the better of Amir. He grabbed a paddle and steered the boat toward the object. As they drew closer, they could make out a metallic shape partially buried in the shoreline mud. "I'm going to get it," Amir decided, already kicking off his shoes. "Be careful," Roger warned. "We don't know what's down there." The water was only waist-deep as Amir reached the object. He carefully began to work it free from the thick sludge. What emerged from the muck left both father and son momentarily speechless. It was an ornate dagger with a medieval-style hilt. It was surprisingly well-preserved despite being partially rusted. The 12-inch blade ended in a sharp point that still looked menacing. "This is no piece of trash," Roger murmured as his son carried the find back to the boat. "It looks ancient." Amir was examining the dagger, fascinated, when he noticed something else in the spot where he had found it. "There's more down there." For the next hour, the Patels completely forgot their intention to fish. With meticulous care, they unearthed several more objects from the mud. A gold chain with a delicate dragonfly pendant, a wristwatch with a broken strap, a leather wallet waterlogged and warped but with documents still legible inside, and most disturbingly, a diary. Its covers waterproofed, its pages stained but filled with perfectly clear handwriting. With trembling hands, Roger examined the driver's license from the wallet. The smiling face of Michael Harrington stared back at him from the laminated photograph. "My God," he whispered. "It's them. The couple that vanished years ago." 4 hours later, the small lagoon had become a frenetic scene of investigation. Sheriff Frank Dempsey, now with more gray in his hair and more lines on his face than 5 years prior, personally supervised the operation as forensic technicians meticulously combed every inch of the area. Jackson Reed, recently promoted to chief ranger for the sector, watched with a grim expression as divers scoured the lagoon's muddy bottom. 5 years, he muttered to himself. 5 years and less than a mile from where we found their clothes. Special Agent Diana Ramirez, who had never truly let the case go despite being officially reassigned, carefully examined the recovered diary. It belonged to Carol Harrington, and the final entries were dated in the days after their disappearance. "This changes everything," she declared, looking up at Dempsey. "They didn't die right away. According to this, they were held captive for at least a week." The diary's pages told a horrifying story. According to Carol's writing, she and Michael had been deceived by a man who presented himself as a retired Army veteran and an expert on the Everglades. He had offered to show them a colony of rare birds not marked on any official maps. Once they were deep in the densest part of the swamp, the man had subdued them at rifle point. "He took us to a cabin," Carol had written. "It's built on stilts, hidden among the mangroves. He says no one has found it in 30 years, that he's safe from them here. We don't know who they are, but he seems convinced Michael and I are spies. He calls himself the Colonel, though he hasn't told us his real name." The entries grew more desperate as the days passed. Carol described how the Colonel subjected them to endless interrogations about supposed government operations, convinced the Harringtons had been sent to find him. The final entry, written in a shaky hand, was blood-chilling. "Michael tried to escape last night. The Colonel caught him. The look in his eyes. There's no humanity left in him. He gave us clean clothes and told us to wash in the river. He says it will all be over today. I'm so scared. If anyone ever finds this, my name is Carol Harrington. Please tell our parents we love them." "What about the dagger?" Dempsey asked, pointing to the metal artifact carefully bagged as evidence. "It's authentic," Ramirez replied. "Preliminary experts suggest it could be a ceremonial dagger from the Civil War, the kind of relic an obsessive military history collector would prize." The pieces were beginning to fit, Forensic analysis of the area revealed that the objects had been deliberately buried in a bundle wrapped in waxed canvas, designed to preserve the contents. This wasn't an accidental disposal, it was an intentional burial. "Is he playing with us?" Ramirez concluded as the team discussed the findings at an emergency meeting that night. First the clothes by the alligator lake, now these carefully preserved personal effects. "He wants us to know what he did, but on his own terms." The divers found no human remains in the lagoon, but analysis of the surrounding mud revealed something disturbing. Microscopic particles of human bone, too small to be identified by the naked eye, scattered over an area of roughly 20 square yards. "He tried to eliminate all evidence," the forensic pathologist theorized, possibly through some kind of chemical dissolution, followed by dispersal of the remains. The investigation was reactivated with renewed urgency. Specialized teams began to systematically comb the most remote areas of the Everglades, focusing on zones where a structure like the cabin Carol described could be hidden. A week after the Patel's discovery, a detailed analysis of historical aerial photographs identified a possible anomaly in a small structure barely visible through the dense mangrove canopy approximately 5 miles from where the personal items were found. "We have to be extremely cautious," Ramirez warned as they prepared the operation. "If this is really our suspect, we're dealing with someone who has evaded capture for years, knows this terrain perfectly, and will not hesitate to use lethal force." The raid was planned with military precision. FBI agents, park rangers, and members of the sheriff's tactical unit would approach simultaneously from multiple directions, sealing off any possible escape route. What they would find in that hidden cabin among the mangroves would forever change their understanding of the case, revealing a horror that surpassed even their worst fears. The dawn of October 2nd, 2000, found an elite team moving swiftly through the dense vegetation of the Everglades. The joint operation included 12 FBI agents led by Diana Ramirez, 8 members of Sheriff Dempsey's tactical unit, and 4 rangers headed by Jackson Reed, whose knowledge of the terrain was invaluable. They had approached the target location using 3 different routes, employing small, shallow draft boats as far as they could before proceeding on foot, wading through murky water and dodging treacherous mud pits that could swallow a grown man without a trace. At 6:17 a.m., Alpha Team, led by Ramirez, gained visual confirmation of the target, a weathered wooden structure elevated on rusted stilts, almost invisible amidst the surrounding foliage. The cabin, roughly 400 square feet, appeared abandoned at first glance. There were no signs of movement, no smoke rising from the crude chimney, and no lights visible through windows that were covered with what looked like military sacks. "Perimeter secured," Special Agent Rodriguez whispered over the comms, confirming that Beta and Gamma teams had taken up strategic positions around the structure. "No perceptible movement. Do we proceed?" Diana nodded silently, giving the prearranged hand signals. The plan was simple but effective. A simultaneous approach from 3 directions, leaving only the rear, which faced a virtually impenetrable swamp, as a potential escape route. Time seemed to stand still as the agents advanced with pinpoint precision toward the cabin. The only sound was the constant drone of insects and the occasional splash of an unseen aquatic animal. 10 yards from the entrance, Ramirez raised a clenched fist, signaling everyone to halt. Something was wrong. "The door," she murmured to herself, observing through her tactical binoculars. "It's ajar." Protocol dictated they fall back at any suspicious sign, but Diana's instinct, honed by 15 years in the FBI, told her this might be their only chance. She signaled to proceed, but with maximum caution. At 6:23 a.m., the teams reached their assault positions. A silent countdown culminated in a coordinated breach of the structure. FBI, show me your hands! Ramirez's voice echoed as they stormed the cabin's interior. What they found inside left them momentarily paralyzed. Not by the armed resistance they expected, but by the surreal scene that unfolded before their eyes. The interior walls were completely covered with newspaper clippings, maps, photographs, and diagrams, all interconnected with colored strings. Thousands of images and texts created a disturbing mosaic that documented not only the Harrington disappearance, but dozens of other missing persons cases from the Everglades over the past 3 decades. In the center of the main room, a workbench held crude taxidermy equipment, various chemicals, and what appeared to be carefully aligned surgical instruments. An adjacent shelf displayed dozens of sealed jars, meticulously labeled with dates and what looked like initials. "My God," whispered Sheriff Dempsey, who had insisted on personally joining the raid despite his age. "It's a trophy museum." Diana approached the collection of jars, her face a mask of professionalism that barely concealed her horror. Each container held a small object, a wedding ring, a lock of hair, a fragment of an ID card, a tooth. Small, macabre relics of truncated lives. "We have a journal," announced Agent Rodriguez, carefully holding up a thick, worn, leather-bound notebook. "Looks like our subject has been meticulously documenting his activities." Jackson Reed, who was examining a separate area of the cabin, called the group's attention. "I found something. I think these are photographs of the victims." The album Reed had discovered contained images carefully organized by date. The first, yellowed with age, were from 1971. The last entry, with photographs still vivid, corresponded to a young German hiking couple reported missing just 3 months ago. 29 years, 17 confirmed victims, Ramirez counted as she quickly reviewed the contents. Some of these disappearances were never even connected. A forensic agent, just beginning to process the scene, made another disturbing discovery. A hidden trapdoor beneath a worn military rug. The opening led to a space directly beneath the cabin where the swamp water created a natural chamber. "It's a disposal area," the tech explained after a preliminary inspection. "He likely used chemicals to accelerate decomposition. With the local fauna and the natural currents, the remains would simply disappear over time." As they processed the scene, one question lingered among them all. Where was the owner of this macabre sanctuary? The answer came, in part, when Ramirez found a perfectly made military cot in a corner of the cabin. Beside it, on a small table improvised from ammunition boxes, sat a manila envelope sealed with red wax. On the front, written in a surprisingly elegant script, were the words, "For those who finally found me." With latex gloves and extreme caution, Diana opened the envelope. It contained several handwritten pages and a black and white photograph of a young soldier in a Vietnam-era uniform. "My name is Colonel Warren Mitchell, though that rank was never officially bestowed upon me," the letter began. "By the time you read this, I will have embarked on my final mission. I do not expect to return, nor do I wish to. The last 30 years have been a long exercise in survival and personal justice, but even the most dedicated soldiers must eventually rest." The document went on to detail how Mitchell, a former Special Forces operative who had served in long-range reconnaissance teams in Vietnam, had returned to the United States deeply traumatized. After years of failed psychiatric treatment, he had taken refuge in the Everglades, where his military training allowed him to survive far from civilization. According to his own account, Mitchell initially just wanted to be left alone. That all changed in 1971 when he witnessed a pair of tourists deliberately destroying the nests of protected birds to steal the eggs as souvenirs. The act triggered a violent reaction in him that culminated in the first pair of disappearances. "I am not a monster," Mitchell wrote. "I am a guardian. The Everglades took me in when society cast me out. I have dedicated my life to protecting this sanctuary from those who come to desecrate it, to take selfies with its destruction, to carry away trophies of its sacred beauty." The final pages of the letter included something even more disturbing: precise coordinates for the locations where Mitchell had disposed of his victims over the years. In the case of the Harringtons, he confirmed they were targeted after he observed them collecting samples of protected plants without authorization. "None of them had a chance to show respect," he wrote. "None of them passed the test." The document concluded with a kind of farewell. "I am 73 years old, and the malaria I contracted in the swamps of Vietnam is finally collecting its debt. I have decided to undertake one last expedition into the depths of the labyrinth, where even the native Mikosuke feared to venture. Do not look for my body. Like all my prey, I will become part of the swamp I have protected and loved." In the following weeks, the coordinates provided by Mitchell allowed investigators to recover evidence confirming the truth of his confessions. However, despite an exhaustive search, the self-proclaimed colonel's body was never found. The story of Warren Mitchell and his crimes in the Everglades became one of the most documented serial killer cases in Florida's history. Posthumous psychiatric analyses suggested an extreme case of post-traumatic stress disorder combined with paranoid delusions and an obsessive personality disorder. As for the Harringtons, their remains were finally recovered and returned to their families for a proper burial, 10 years after they had vanished. The Civil War dagger that had led to their discovery turned out to be an heirloom Mitchell had inherited from his grandfather, a Confederate officer. Diana Ramirez, who would eventually write a detailed book on the case, concluded her analysis with a haunting reflection. "The Everglades keep many secrets. Some, like Warren Mitchell's, eventually surface, but one cannot help but wonder how many more remain hidden in its depths." April 2002. A leaden sky hung over the Everglades as a spring storm gathered on the horizon. In the small conference room of the Flamingo Ranger Station, Diana Ramirez stared pensively at the wall where Mitchell's mural had been partially recreated. 18 months after the discovery of the cabin, the case remained officially open, though its priority had been reduced. "You still think he's alive, don't you?" Jackson Reed's voice cut through her thoughts. The park ranger entered holding 2 mugs of coffee, offering one to the FBI agent. Diana accepted it with a grateful nod. "The letter was too convenient," she said. "A man with his level of paranoia doesn't just write a full confession and disappear." "The medical analysis supports his claim of chronic malaria," Reed argued, gesturing to a report on the table. "Blood samples we found on his cot showed signs of an advanced stage of the disease. The doctors estimated he had months, maybe weeks to live at that point." "Precisely," Diana countered. "A predator like Mitchell who survived out here for 3 decades, eluding the authorities. He doesn't just surrender to an illness, it's not his style." The investigation had unearthed disturbing details about Warren Mitchell. His partially classified military file suggested involvement in covert operations that officially never existed. After 3 tours in Vietnam, he was discharged in 1969 for psychological instability, only to vanish from the grid in 1970 after abandoning mandatory psychiatric treatment. Most unsettling, the records showed Mitchell had received specialized training in survival, camouflage, and evasion techniques. He was an expert at remaining invisible in hostile territory for prolonged periods. "We've verified 15 of the 17 locations he mentioned in his letter," Reed continued. All of them contained evidence corroborating his confessions. The last two are in areas so inaccessible they'd require specialized teams. Diana nodded absently, her eyes scanning the photographs of the victims. The Harringtons had been just two names on a long list of people Mitchell had judged and found guilty of what he considered crimes against the Everglades. "Have you noticed this pattern?" Diana asked, pointing to the dates on a timeline map. "Between 1986 and 1989, no victims. Then between 1992 and 1994, another pause. Where was Mitchell during those periods?" Reed leaned in to examine the dates. Could he have been sick? Or maybe temporarily out of the Everglades? Or maybe, Diana suggested, he was perfecting his method. Each series of disappearances shows a greater level of sophistication. Compare the first cases to the last. He went from simple, traceless vanishings to elaborate stagings like the Harringtons. Their conversation was cut short by the arrival of Sheriff Dempsey, who strode into the room with a grim expression. "We have a problem," he announced without preamble. "They found another set of folded clothes by Blackwater Lake this morning." The silence that followed was oppressive. Diana was the first to break it. "When did the victim disappear?" "That's the thing," Dempsey replied. "There are no recent missing person reports in the park, but the clothes, the way they were arranged, it's identical to the Harrington case." 3 hours later, the forensics team was completing its preliminary processing of the scene. The clothes, a plaid shirt, cargo pants, and underwear, were perfectly folded on the same Florida bin where the Harringtons' garments had been found 7 years prior. "No visible blood. The clothes are clean, pockets turned inside out," reported forensic technician Elena Suarez, now head of the department. "It's a chilling case of déjà vu." Diana carefully examined the clothes, noticing something peculiar. "These aren't new, but they don't show signs of recent wear either. Look at the edges of the cuffs, the fading of the fabric. This looks like clothing that's been in storage for years." Lab analysis confirmed Ramirez's theory. The garments were at least 5 years old, though they had been recently laundered with the same industrial detergent found on the Harringtons' clothes. More disturbingly, the labels belonged to brands that had ceased production in the mid-90s. "It's a message," Diana concluded during an emergency meeting that night. "Someone wants us to know that Mitchell's legacy continues." "A copycat?" Dempsey suggested. "Or Mitchell himself," Diana countered. "The clothes are from the same era as the Harringtons. They could have belonged to unidentified victims, or they could be part of a kit he kept prepared for future stagings." The theory gained credibility when visitor logs showed no missing person matching the size or description of the clothes found. There was no new victim, only a disturbing echo of the past. 3 days later, Jackson Reed received an anonymous package at the ranger station. Inside, carefully wrapped in wax paper, was a small, worn military field notebook. A handwritten note simply read, "The Colonel is still watching." The notebook contained detailed observations of recent activities in the Everglades, groups of tourists leaving trash, fishermen using prohibited methods, hikers straying from marked trails. Each entry was dated, with the most recent being just a week ago. "This isn't Mitchell's," Diana concluded after examining the handwriting. "It's similar but not identical. Someone is continuing his mission." The search for this new guardian of the Everglades became the team's top priority. Psychological profiles suggested it was likely someone who had known Mitchell, possibly a disciple or apprentice who shared his distorted vision of protecting the swamp. The list of suspects was surprisingly long. Former rangers fired for being overly strict with visitors, local veterans with histories similar to Mitchell's, even environmental enthusiasts with records of extreme protests. In May of 2002, A disturbing discovery added urgency to the investigation. During a routine patrol, rangers found camouflaged traps on several unofficial trails. Hidden pits with sharpened stakes, nearly invisible tripwires strung at neck height, and even crude electrical shock devices connected to car batteries. These traps were not designed for animals. Their targets were clearly humans who ventured off authorized routes. "He's escalating," Diana warned during an emergency meeting with park authorities. The original Mitchell would watch for weeks or months before acting. This new subject is more impatient, more willing to cause immediate harm. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Elena Suarez, re-examining soil samples collected near the traps, found uncommon synthetic fibers. Analysis identified them as components of a specific type of military uniform used during operations in Afghanistan in the late 90s. "Our suspect could be a veteran of more recent conflicts," Diana theorized. "Someone who, like Mitchell, returned traumatized and found a refuge and a mission in the Everglades." The theory led them to investigate local veterans of Middle Eastern operations. Among the names that emerged, one caught Diana's attention. Marcus Whitaker, Jr., the son of the photographer who had died mysteriously after seeing the Harringtons with Mitchell. According to records, Whitaker Jr. had served in special forces until 1998, when he was discharged after a combat injury. Upon returning to Florida, he had worked briefly as a nature guide in the Everglades before disappearing from the formal job market. Neighbors reported seeing him occasionally, always loaded with photography equipment, following in his late father's footsteps. "The connection is too strong to be a coincidence," Diana argued. "His father witnessed the Harrington abduction and ended up dead. He returns from the war, potentially traumatized, and begins frequenting the exact same areas as Mitchell." On June 7, 2002, after weeks of surveillance, a joint FBI and Ranger team intercepted Marcus Whitaker Jr. as he was setting what turned out to be another trap in a remote area of the park. In his cabin located legally on the national park's boundary, they found irrefutable evidence. Maps with markings similar to Mitchell's, survival gear, and most damningly Mitchell's personal journal, which had vanished from evidence custody. During interrogation, Whitaker Jr. revealed a disturbing story. He claimed to have met Mitchell when he was just 14 years old. The colonel had saved his life when he got lost during a photography trip with his fur. "The colonel saw potential in me," Whitaker Jr. confessed with a chilling calm. "He taught me how to move through the swamp, how to respect it. He showed me the truth about what people were doing to this sacred place." More unsettling still, Whitaker Jr. claimed his father had not been murdered by Mitchell but had become his first willing disciple. The accidental overdose had actually been an elaborate suicide to avoid FBI interrogation and protect Mitchell. "My father passed the legacy to me before he died," he explained. "He told me that one day the colonel would find me and complete my training." Listening to the interrogation recording, a shiver ran down Diana's spine at the next revelation. "The colonel didn't die in 2000. That cabin was just one of his many shelters. The letter, the illness, oh, it was all part of his plan to disappear for good while he passed the torch." The summer of 2002 descended upon the Everglades with its usual ferocity. Suffocating heat, daily torrential downpours, and clouds of mosquitoes turned the vast swamp into an even more hostile environment. For Diana Ramirez, however, the weather was the least of her concerns as she watched Marcus Whitaker Jr. through the one-way glass of the interrogation room. At 38, Whitaker Jr. looked much older. His weathered face, etched with premature lines, reflected years of exposure to the elements. But it was his eyes that unsettled Diana the most. They were cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of remorse. "He's been talking for 3 days, commented Sheriff Dempsey, his hair now completely white as he joined Diana in the observation room. And every new revelation is more disturbing than the last. Diana nodded silently. Whitaker Jr.'s confessions had opened a Pandora's box no one was prepared for. He had not only admitted to his role as Mitchell's disciple, but had hinted at something far more chilling: the existence of what he called the patrol. "I'm not the only one," he had declared with barely concealed pre-boot. The colonel was meticulous in everything, including the selection of his successors. "There are 5 of us in total, each assigned to a different sector of the Everglades, each with a specific mission." That morning's interview focused on identifying the other members of this macabre group. Special Agent Rodriguez, who had developed a certain rapport with Whitaker Jr., was leading the questioning. "You mentioned 5 sectors," Rodriguez began, consulting his notes. "You were responsible for the southern sector near Flamingo. Who was watching the others?" Whitaker Jr. smiled with what looked like genuine amusement. "Do you really think I would betray my brothers? The colonel taught us well. Loyalty comes first." "Marcus," Rodriguez used his first name deliberately. "Sooner or later we'll find them. Your cooperation now could mean the difference between life in prison and the possibility of parole eventually." Whitaker Jr.'s laugh echoed in the small room. "Parole? For what? To live in a world where people systematically destroy everything that is sacred? No, Agent Rodriguez. I don't fear your prisons. The colonel prepared us even for that." Despite his resistance to directly identifying his accomplices, the long interrogation sessions provided enough indirect details for investigators to begin building a profile of the patrol. Apparently, Mitchell had spent years identifying individuals with specific traits. Military veterans with combat trauma, exceptional survival skills, and a psychological predisposition toward extremist views on environmental conservation. "It's like a cult," explained Dr. Sarah Mendelson, a forensic psychologist consulting for the FBI. "Mitchell positioned himself as a father figure to vulnerable, alienated individuals. He offered them purpose, structure, and the feeling of belonging to something larger than themselves." An analysis of Whitaker Jr.'s possessions reinforced this theory. Among his belongings, they found a document titled The Guardian's Code, a 12-page manifesto handwritten by Mitchell that detailed a twisted philosophy of environmental protection at any cost. "Visitors are invaders," one passage read. "Observe their actions, evaluate their respect, warn once, judge after." Diana had read the entire document several times, trying to decipher Mitchell's mind and, by extension, the minds of his followers. "It's a disturbing mix," she commented to Dempsey as they returned to the conference room where the expanded task force met daily. "It combines legitimate conservation principles with a justification for violence. It's rational enough to attract people with genuine environmental concerns and extreme enough to justify lethal action." The team's immediate concern was locating the other 4 guardians before they could disappear or, worse, claim more victims. Based on the 5-sector structure mentioned by Whitaker Jr., investigators divided the Everglades by cardinal points and began methodically analyzing patterns of strange incidents in each area. The first breakthrough came from ranger logs. Over the past 2 years, the park's northwest quadrant had seen an unusual spike in visitors reporting lost or stolen equipment. What was significant was not the frequency but the pattern. Only items considered harmful to the ecosystem, like certain types of fish hooks, non-regulation nets, or tools for collecting specimens, ever went missing. "It's as if someone is selectively confiscating things," Jackson Reed observed. Simultaneously, an analysis of surveillance cameras at the park entrances revealed a recurring suspect, a man in his 50s who regularly entered through the northwest access point, always alone and always equipped for a long expedition. Most intriguing of all, While he entered the park frequently, he was rarely seen leaving through any of its official checkpoints. On July 17th, after 2 weeks of covert surveillance, FBI agents identified and followed the suspect to a remote cabin near the park's boundary. The man was Raymond Ortiz, 53, a former Marine sergeant who had served in the First Gulf War. He was officially registered as an independent guide, though he rarely took on clients. Unlike the operation at Mitchell's cabin, this time the agents opted for a less confrontational approach. Diana, disguised as a tourist hoping to hire a guide to photograph rare birds, approached Ortiz at a small local market where he was buying supplies. The conversation, initially cordial, took a revealing turn when Diana, following a carefully planned script, casually mentioned her desire to collect a few interesting samples for a university project. "The swamp isn't a supermarket where you can just take whatever you want," Ortiz replied, his tone suddenly cold. "People like you are part of the problem." The near-verbatim quote from the Guardian's code confirmed their suspicions. 3 days later, a tactical team raided Ortiz's cabin. They found evidence that clearly linked him to the patrol, maps identical to Whitaker Jr.'s, the same type of traps, and most disturbingly, a jar containing a human finger preserved in formaldehyde, meticulously labeled with a date and initials. Unlike Whitaker Jr., Ortiz did not resist arrest, nor did he seem proud of his actions. During his interrogations, he seemed almost resigned. "We knew you'd find us eventually," he confessed. "The colonel told us our job was to carry on his legacy for as long as possible, but that the civilization we were trying to hold at bay would inevitably catch up to us." The most valuable part of Ortiz's testimony was his willingness to identify the other members of the patrol. With his help, over the next 3 weeks, authorities managed to capture 2 more: Edwin Vance, a former Army sniper who patrolled the northeast sector, and Luisa Mendez, a former military nurse and the only woman in the group, responsible for the central sector. The 5th member, assigned to the southwest, proved to be the most elusive: Gregory Kendall, a former demolitions expert with advanced training in evasion techniques. He had apparently vanished without a trace after Whitaker Jr.'s arrest. "Kendall was different," Ortiz explained during one session. "More dedicated, more extreme. The colonel considered him his true successor. While the rest of us followed the code, Kendall lived it like a religion." On August 5th, the investigation suffered a devastating setback. While being transported to federal court for a preliminary hearing, Marcus Whitaker Jr. managed to break free from his restraints inside the transport vehicle. In the ensuing struggle, he disarmed one of the marshals, causing the vehicle to crash into the highway's guardrail. Using the confusion as cover, he vanished into the dense vegetation bordering the road. Whitaker Jr.'s escape triggered one of the largest manhunts in Florida's history. More than 200 federal, state, and local agents systematically combed the area around the crash site. Helicopters with thermal cameras flew overhead day and night while canine units tried to pick up his trail. Despite the massive effort, Whitaker Jr. seemed to have evaporated. "He's doing exactly what Mitchell taught him," Diana explained in a tense briefing. "Military evasion techniques combined with an intimate knowledge of the terrain. Every minute that passes, he gets deeper into areas where he'll be practically impossible to find." The authorities' concern was not unfounded. 5 days after the escape, a group of hikers found a disturbing message carved into the bark of a cypress tree on a little-used trail. "The patrol is still watching. The trial continues." For Diana Ramirez, the implication was clear and terrifying. Despite the arrests, Mitchell's legacy endured. Somewhere in the depths of the Everglades, at least 2 of his disciples remained free, determined to continue their twisted mission of protection. What no one could have imagined then was that the real horror was just beginning. and that the darkest chapter of this story had yet to be written. October 2002. Autumn brought a slight reprieve from the suffocating heat of the Everglades, though for outsiders the change was barely perceptible. For Diana Ramirez, now more than 2 years into the case, every day that Whitaker Jr. and Kendall remained at large felt like a personal defeat. The Joint Operations Center, established in a building annexed to the Flamingo Ranger Station, had been downsized. Of the 50 agents initially assigned after Whitaker Jr.'s escape, only 12 remained. The FBI, pressed by other high-priority cases across the country, had downgraded the search to a secondary operation. "We can't tie up resources indefinitely on a case with no progress," her supervisor had explained during a tense video call. "I understand your frustration, Diana, but it's been 2 months without a single confirmed sighting." Diana now stared at the map of the Everglades that dominated the main wall of the ops center. Dozens of colored pins marked reported sightings, trap discoveries, and locations where carved messages had been found. The pattern, or rather the lack of one, was baffling. "They're playing with us," she murmured to herself. Unlike Mitchell, whose movements had followed a defined territorial logic, Whitaker Jr. and Kendall seemed to move erratically, appearing and disappearing in opposite sectors of the park, sometimes on the same day. Jackson Reed, who had become her closest ally in the investigation, walked into the room carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You have that look again," he commented, offering her one. "The one that says you think you're missing something." Diana managed a weak smile, accepting the coffee. "It's like they've deliberately changed the pattern." Mitchell operated like a classic territorial predator, establishing and defending a specific area. These two, it's almost as if they want us to think they're everywhere at once. Reed nodded, studying the map. What if that's their exact goal? To create the illusion of omnipresence? Their conversation was cut short by the arrival of Elena Suarez, who entered holding a tablet, her excitement obvious. "We've got something," she announced without preamble. "Soil sample analysis from the last 3 scenes all share an unusual component. Traces of a specific type of clay found only in a very limited region of the park." The implications were significant. If Whitaker Jr. and Kendall were using a central location as a base, they would be repeatedly transiting through the same area. Inevitably, they would transfer characteristic soil particles from that spot to the sites where they appeared. "Where exactly is this clay?" Diana asked, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. Elena manipulated the tablet, projecting a geological map onto the main screen. "This formation here," she pointed to a relatively small zone in the western sector of the park, an area of about 5 square kilometers. Reed studied the location, his brow furrowed. "I know that area. It's practically inaccessible by land or water. The Seminoles used to call it the Isle of Spirits. There are ruins of an old 19th century trading post there, abandoned after a series of devastating hurricanes." The information catalyzed a renewed search operation, this time focused specifically on that remote region. Using high-resolution satellite imagery and drones equipped with thermal cameras, the team began to meticulously map the area. On October 27th, their efforts paid off. A drone detected a thermal anomaly consistent with a small camouflage structure or shelter hidden within the dense vegetation. The images showed a regular pattern too precise to be natural, yet skillfully disguised to blend in with the environment. "It could be a temporary camp," Reed cautioned during the planning meeting. "Or," Diana countered, "it could be exactly what we're looking for, their base of operations." The operation to approach the site was designed with extreme caution. Unlike previous raids, this required a stealthier approach. Whitaker Jr. and Kendall were not just desperate fugitives, they were trained veterans with years of experience living in one of the country's most hostile environments. An 8-person team, including Diana, Reed, and tactical specialists, trained in jungle operations, set out at dawn on October 29th. The approach took nearly 10 hours, alternating between small boats and treks on foot through treacherous terrain. At 4:37 p.m., the team established observation posts around the target, maintaining a safe distance as they assessed the situation. What they saw confirmed their suspicions. The ruins of the old trading post had been meticulously adapted into a shelter. Roofs of natural foliage concealed solid structures beneath, while rudimentary but effective water collection systems took advantage of the frequent rains. "We have movement," Agent Rodriguez whispered over the comms. "Single individual approaching from the east. Looks like he's carrying something. Possible game." Through her tactical binoculars, Diana could clearly make out Gregory Kendall, returning to what was obviously his refuge. The former demolitions expert walked with the confidence of a man completely secure in his territory, carrying what looked like a small deer over his shoulders. "I don't see Whitaker," reported Reed, who was observing from another angle. The second fugitive's absence complicated the situation. The original plan had been to capture both simultaneously to prevent one from alerting the other. After a brief, silent deliberation using pre-established hand signals, Diana decided to proceed with the approach, but delay the final action until they could confirm Whitaker Jr.'s location. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the cypress trees, the team moved cautiously toward the ruins. The tension was palpable. Every step had to be calculated to avoid potential traps or makeshift alarm systems. Less than 50 meters from the target, the agent leading the approach stopped abruptly, raising a clenched fist in the universal signal for a threat. Ahead of them, barely visible in the undergrowth, a thin wire was stretched across the path at ankle height. "Tripwire," the specialist confirmed after a careful examination. "Connected to some kind of alarm mechanism, not an explosive." Bypassing the danger, the team continued their approach on an alternate route. When they were less than 20 meters from the ruins, they gained a clear view of the interior through gaps in the partially collapsed walls. What they saw defied all their expectations. Kendall was not alone in the shelter, but he wasn't with Whitaker Jr. either. Instead, 4 unknown figures were moving about the space with familiarity. 2 men and 2 women, all dressed in practical camouflage gear similar to Kendall's. "We have multiple unidentified subjects," Diana reported in a tense whisper over the comms. "I repeat, there are more people involved than we anticipated." The revelation forced an immediate reassessment of their strategy. With at least 5 potentially hostile individuals and no knowledge of their armament, a direct assault was far too risky. As the team temporarily withdrew to reevaluate, Diana couldn't help but feel a mixture of awe and dread. Mitchell's legacy was clearly more extensive and organized than they had ever imagined. This was no longer just about the 5 original Guardians. Apparently, there was a second generation. New recruits who were continuing to expand the network. Back at the operations base that night, the discovery triggered a frenzy of activity. Immediate reinforcements were requested while analysts worked frantically to identify the new subjects based on photographs taken during the observation. "It's a full-blown cell," Diana explained during an emergency briefing with her superiors, now connected by video conference from Washington. "We're not just dealing with 2 fugitives, this is a structured organization with a hierarchy and a recruitment system." The first ID came just before dawn. One of the women seen at the camp was Catherine Bennett, 29, a former military nurse who had served in Afghanistan. She had been officially registered as a missing person for 8 months. Her family in Tennessee had reported disturbing changes in her behavior after she returned from service, including a growing obsession with conspiracy theories about imminent ecological disasters. "The pattern holds," observed Dr. Mendelsohn, who had been brought back in as a consultant. Mitchell specifically selected traumatized veterans with a predisposition for apocalyptic worldviews. He offered them a cause, a purpose that channeled their trauma into protecting the swamp. As the other subjects were identified, a disturbing picture emerged. They all shared similar stories of military service, traumatic experiences, and a period of social alienation after returning to civilian life. They were, in many ways, younger reflections of Mitchell himself. The expanded operation to capture the entire group was set for the early hours of November 1st. With the support of 3 tactical helicopters, ground teams, and strategically positioned snipers, the authorities hoped to completely neutralize the threat in a single stroke. What no one could have foreseen was that, inside the ruins of the old trading post, Gregory Kendall was at that very moment holding a shortwave radio, communicating in a prearranged code with Marcus Whitaker Jr., who was miles away implementing the final phase of a plan conceived years ago by Colonel Mitchell himself. A plan that, if successful, would transform the Everglades and the world's perception of them forever. The pre-dawn hours of November 1st, 2002 were unusually cold by Florida standards. A thin mist crept over the surface of the water, creating a ghostly landscape that further complicated the already challenging operation. At 4:15 a.m., the tactical teams moved into their final positions surrounding the ruins of the trading post. Diana Ramirez, stationed in the mobile command post a kilometer away, monitored the operation through real-time video feeds from tactical cameras and surveillance drones. "All teams are in position," the FBI's tactical commander confirmed, awaiting the final go-ahead. Diana studied the images one last time. The thermal cameras painted a clear picture. 5 figures inside the shelter, all seemingly asleep, scattered throughout the structure. But there were no lookouts, no sentinels. It was a glaring inconsistency, a stark contrast to the meticulous caution their targets had displayed until this moment. "Something's not right," she murmured, unable to shake the gnawing unease. "This is too easy." Jackson Reed, her lead field advisor, stood at her side, his expression mirroring her own concern. "Kendall is a demolitions man," he said, his voice low. "And Mitchell was obsessive about contingencies. For them to leave the perimeter unwatched, it doesn't track." Despite their doubts, time was a luxury they didn't have. With the first light of dawn creeping over the horizon, every passing minute eroded their tactical advantage. Diana made the call. "Proceed with extreme caution," she ordered. "Alpha team, primary approach. Bravo and Charlie teams, maintain the perimeter and watch for anomalies. Any sign of a trap, you abort immediately." The operation began with military precision. The agents moved like shadows toward the structure, their synchronized movements the product of countless hours of training. 10 meters out, the Alpha team leader signaled a halt. Something had caught his eye. "Control, we have a barely visible tripwire at ground level. Possible trap." Explosive ordnance specialists crept forward, using detection gear to assess the threat. "No conventional explosives detected," they reported. "It appears to be a simple mechanical alarm system." With extreme delicacy, they disabled the mechanism and the team resumed its advance. 5 meters from the main entrance, another observation stopped their progress. "The door is ajar," the team leader reported, "not consistent with a secure perimeter." The mounting evidence of tactical negligence from highly trained individuals set off every alarm in Diana's mind. "Abort direct approach," she commanded instantly. "Send in the tactical robot for a preliminary sweep." The small, tracked device, equipped with multiple cameras and sensors, advanced slowly toward the structure. As it crossed the threshold, it transmitted images that sent a chill through the command center. The 5 bodies detected by the thermal cameras were not people but elaborate decoys, sleeping bags stuffed with chemical mixtures that mimicked body heat, each one roughly molded into a human shape. "It's a trap! Pull back now!" Diana commanded, but her warning came a breath too late. A series of controlled detonations echoed across the swamp. These weren't explosions designed to kill, but to disorient. Smoke grenades, sonic devices, and brilliant flares ignited the area, creating a sensory chaos that made any coordinated movement impossible. In the midst of the confusion, 3 of the agents who had advanced closest to the structure suddenly dropped to the ground. Not from any blast, but from tranquilizer darts fired from hidden positions in the surrounding vegetation. "Snipers! Find cover!" the tactical commander yelled as the team scrambled to fall back in disarray. In the command center, Diana watched helplessly as the meticulously planned operation unraveled in seconds. "We need immediate air evac for the downed agents," she ordered as Reed was already on the radio coordinating with the standby helicopters. It was then that all communications were severed simultaneously. Video feeds froze, radios hissed with static, even the satellite phones went dead. "Signal jammers!" the communications tech identified immediately. "Sophisticated, military grade or higher." The revelation was terrifying. They were facing someone with access to advanced military technology, not simple fugitives hiding in a swamp. As the teams on the ground struggled to regroup amidst the chaos, a voice, amplified by strategically placed speakers, boomed through the swamp. "Agent Ramirez, Sheriff Dempsey, Ranger Reed, we know you're listening." The voice was unmistakably that of Marcus Whitaker, Jr. "We have no intention of causing permanent harm. Your agents will wake in approximately 6 hours, unharmed, but with an important message." A tense silence followed the declaration. Then the voice continued. "For years you have ignored the Colonel's warnings. You have treated the Everglades as an amusement park, a resource to be exploited. Today that changes. You have exactly 24 hours to completely evacuate all tourist facilities in the park. After that deadline, we cannot guarantee the safety of any visitor." When communications were restored 20 minutes later, the situation was clear. The 3 agents had been sedated with non-lethal tranquilizers. The attackers had vanished without a trace, taking all the equipment from the shelter with them. The structure was completely empty save for a wooden plank nailed to the central wall. On it were carved 2 words. First warning. The failure of the operation triggered an unprecedented crisis as the FBI airlifted its unconscious agents for medical evaluation. Diana faced an impossible decision. Take the threat seriously and temporarily close one of the nation's most visited national parks, or risk the so-called patrol making good on their threats. The answer came 6 hours later when simultaneously at 5 different points in the park, powerful explosions destroyed tourist docks, observation towers, and popular boardwalks. Miraculously, thanks to the early hour, there were no casualties, but the message was unequivocal. "This has escalated beyond a simple criminal investigation," the FBI's deputy director stated during an emergency video conference that afternoon. "We are dealing with environmentally motivated domestic terrorism." The designation instantly changed the dynamic. National counter-terrorism resources were mobilized, including specialized army units with experience in jungle terrain operations. The Everglades was officially closed to the public, as EOD teams systematically swept every accessible facility. To Diana, however, the militarization of the response felt counterproductive. "We're not understanding them," she argued during a tense meeting with the new unified command. "Mitchell and his followers see this as a war for preservation." Every military helicopter, every boot on the ground confirms their narrative that the swamp is being invaded and needs to be defended. Her perspective, though considered, was subordinated to standard counterterrorism protocols. Over the following weeks, more than 500 personnel patrolled the Everglades, turning the national park into a militarized zone. The patrol's response was swift. While avoiding direct confrontation, they began a systematic campaign of sabotage. Water systems were contaminated with non-toxic but alarming dyes. Non-lethal traps temporarily immobilized patrols. And most disturbingly, there was evidence of constant surveillance of military operations, demonstrating an intimate knowledge of the deployed forces' movements. On November 23rd, 3 weeks after the initial incident, Diana received an unexpected call at her temporary lodgings near the park. It was Jackson Reed. "You need to come now," he said. His voice carried an unusual urgency, even for the circumstances. "Just you. Don't tell anyone else." An hour later, Diana arrived at a small, abandoned ranger cabin on the eastern edge of the park. Reed was waiting for her, his face etched with tension. "I found this in my locker this morning," he explained, handing her a sealed envelope. "It's addressed specifically to you." The envelope contained a handwritten note and a small USB drive. The note, signed simply with the initial M, read, "The real story was never about us, Agent Ramirez. It was about him, the last guardian." The attached file contains coordinates and a time. Only you and Reed. No weapons, no communications, a single opportunity. Diana plugged the drive into her secured laptop. It contained a single file, a video recording dated just 2 days prior. In it, an old but surprisingly vigorous man stared directly into the camera. His face, weathered by decades of exposure to the elements, was unmistakable, despite the years that had passed since the few photographs in his military file were taken. "Colonel Warren Mitchell," Diana whispered, a chill tracing its way down her spine. "Agent Ramirez," Mitchell began on the recording, his voice gravelly yet clear. "I have followed your dedication to this case with great interest. You have shown a tenacity I can respect. That is why I am offering you what I have offered no one else. The complete truth, not about the Harringtons or the other unfortunate souls who crossed my path, but about why." November 25th, at dawn, at the coordinates provided, only you and Ranger Reed, who has shown a respect for the Everglades that few possess. No weapons, no tricks. I am 78 years old, Agent Ramirez. This is my final act as a guardian. Do not waste it. The video ended abruptly, leaving Diana and Reed in a silence thick with implication. "What are we going to do?" Reed finally asked. Diana looked out the window at the vast swamp stretching beyond, the same swamp that had consumed years of her professional and personal life. "We're going to end this," she replied, "once and for all."